Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday. So the 20-year constitutional law scholar and merchant extraordinaire has apparently, allegedly, stated that while cops can order you out of a vehicle if they've made a traffic stop in almost every state, they cannot do it in Pennsylvania, despite Pennsylvania being the state that gave us Pennsylvania versus Mims, a United States Supreme Court case where the court held that cops can order the driver out of a vehicle for officer safety without reasonable suspicion of a crime or of a firearm or anything like that. Just for officer safety, I'm going to order you out. That's been expanded to include passengers, not just at the United States Supreme Court level, but also in at least most states. So when you said that, your first thought is, well, the United States Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of what the Fourth Amendment is. So their ruling on the Fourth Amendment is binding, even on state Supreme Courts. But then you'd have to realize that, technically the Fourth Amendment is the floor, and a state could have in their state constitution even more protections for people, which would be like another floor above the floor. So with that in mind, I decided I would check out to see how Pennsylvania responded to Pennsylvania versus Mims, because the United States Supreme Court case was remanded back to the state Supreme Court for further review, I guess. And in the Pennsylvania system, it's called Commonwealth versus Mims. So looking up Commonwealth versus Mims in 1978, the majority opinion for the state said, okay, cool, Fourth Amendment issue is decided. There's this other issue about potential prejudice because there was a line of questioning about Mims being a Muslim. And so we're going to remand back on that issue to the lower court. But the Fourth Amendment issue settled. But then there's a dissenting opinion. One of the justices of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, wait a minute. We have this long line of case law that's looking at not just the Fourth Amendment, but our own constitutional guarantees about unreasonable searches and seizures. And so we should say, fine, Fourth Amendment, great, but our Constitution says that you can't just pull people out of cars willy-nilly just because you made a traffic stop. But that was a dissenting opinion. Now, sometimes dissenting opinions can turn into majority opinions simply because a later court will say, you know what, the majority opinion was wrong, the dissenting opinion was right, so we are now making the dissenting opinion our majority opinion. It can happen. It's happened before. Except it hasn't happened in Pennsylvania. They've never gone back and looked at that. At least the Supreme Court hasn't. Now, the Superior Court for Pennsylvania, which is their Court of Appeals, they've looked at this quite a bit. There's a dozen or so cases that I could find on Google Scholar about it. The most recent one is Commonwealth versus Pratt. It's a 2007 Superior Court case. And again, California Superior Court's the trial court, but out there in Pennsylvania, they do things wrong, and it's their Court of Appeals. Well, anyway, in Commonwealth versus Pratt, the court is looking at a slightly different issue. In this case, the cop orders the passenger to get back in the vehicle. Same kind of thing. Does the officer have the right to control the movements of someone who's been detained? Because it's pretty settled case law. When you detain the vehicle, you're actually detaining everybody in the vehicle. So everybody's detained. So, if the passenger just decides to jump out and try to bounce, can the cop order him back into the vehicle? The court in Commonwealth versus Pratt looked at all of the relevant case law, the buildup, how they got from rulings prior to MIMS at the state court level to MIMS to the Supreme Court Pennsylvania versus MIMS case, and then how it has been subsequently handled since then. Apparently, there was a short period of time where the Commonwealth required the officer to have reasonable suspicion that crime was afoot or that they're a threat in order to order them out. But apparently, in like 1995 or so, the Commonwealth decided to do away with that and just went with baseline MIMS, Pennsylvania versus MIMS. In other words, cop can just order people out for officer safety. Doesn't have to articulate why, he can just order you out. And so that is my understanding of where the case law is. Currently, Pennsylvania has just the baseline Pennsylvania versus MIMS Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court understanding of the officer's right to control the situation and order the driver and the passengers out of the vehicle or back into the vehicle as warranted. And then I'm like, well, maybe there's some sort of statute. I dug around. I couldn't find any statute that prevents the officer from ordering the driver and or passengers out of the vehicle. So that was kind of a dead end. And I'm like, well, maybe I'm missing something. So I quickly looked up various criminal defense attorneys' web pages to see what they were saying. And every single one that I could find in Pennsylvania said you had to get out of the car. If the cop orders you to get out of the car, get out of the car. So I think Chille is wrong. And maybe he has a case that I'm not aware of. Maybe it's not on Google Scholar. You know, I don't have a fancy schmancy Westlaw account, even though I am an attorney. It's just, I don't want to pay that kind of money. So maybe there's a case out there. Maybe I'm wrong. But what I suggest is that you don't take legal advice from people who don't have any vested interest in you and in the outcome. An attorney, like if you go to an attorney, which is what I would recommend. If you're in Pennsylvania and you are wondering of whether or not you have to get out of the car if you're ordered, you should go to an attorney and say, do I have to get out of the car if I'm pulled over for a traffic stop and the cop orders me out of the car? You then have recourse because that attorney probably has malpractice insurance or whatever. So he's got to give you good advice. He's got to give you the best advice he can give you, or else in theory, either you come after him or whatever Pennsylvania's version of the state bar is can come after him. So he's got some vested interest in it. Some failed Power Ranger on YouTube doesn't have that investment. You know, you don't really have a good recourse against him. I mean, you could theoretically sue him if you pull his shenanigans and end up catching charges for it, but your odds of success are low. So you shouldn't take advice from Chille DeCastro, just period. You should not take legal advice from him. I don't even think you should take life advice from him because the dude's obviously not making the right decisions in his life. He's living out of a van or off of friends' couches. Yeah, at his age, he should have a family and kids and a house, and he should be doing something with himself, not just streaming high as a kite in the early hours of the morning. So that's all I got for you today. Don't take advice from randos on YouTube. Don't even take legal advice from me. Always talk to a local attorney. You'd have a attorney-client relationship with them. You'd have some protections, some legal protections, some state bar protections. You'd be all good to go. So thanks for watching. Have a great day.